So, welcome everyone. Today, you're going to hear from two people here from Concentric AI. My name is Lane Sullivan. I'm the Chief Information Security and Strategy Officer. Looking forward to having a discussion today. And then, Kevin, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Kevin Williams. I'm the VP of Global Customer Success here at Concentric AI.
Awesome. And today, Kevin and I are going to talk about the Concentric AI Data Risk Report, the current state of play. So where we see things and the risks that we see and mitigations, remediations. So let's just jump in and talk about Concentric AI real quick. Concentric AI, who are we? Founded in 2018. We have raised 67 million through Series B, 8 AI patents to help the foundation of a lot of the product and process that we have. We have a significant number of customers. You'll see some of the names on here, but really important to see the explosive growth over the last couple of years. Specifically, if we look at the year-over-year growth for Concentric from 22, 23, and 24, it's a 300% growth with 100% client retentions in 23 and 24. So when we talk about the adoption of the technology, differentiators with some of the GenAI security controls that we have, as well as the contextual understanding of data, it's really starting to set Concentric AI apart in the marketplace.
Yeah, the one thing I would add too is like you talked about is on the growth front, but on the second part there is really proud of the retention rate that we actually drive here, and we really think that is a result of the value and the results we're actually able to drive on behalf of our customers year over year.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
I'm biased.
So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the data risk report. We're going to slice and dice it into different verticals like financial services, government, education, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, technology. Important to note, this is sample data from the first part of the year. And we're going to look at the broad picture, but we're also going to look at industry trends as well. So this was analyzed, aggregated based on those trends itself, so that we can see where some of the risks are where they're coming from, where they're going. So let's jump into the highlights before we get into the details. So poor hygiene is driving huge volumes of growth in the velocity and the variety of data that's being created, stored, not specifically for on-prem, but also in the cloud across many different environments. So that explosive growth, when you look at hygiene in managing data, the creation of data, but also if you look down at the bottom, the large amounts of data that they already have. So duplicate, stale, unclaimed data, that kind of data is still holding large amounts of sensitive data. And then the uncontrolled sharing, years ago, Kevin, I don't know if you remember back when the on-prem days, IT used to be a function of the administrative controls of who had access to data. When we move that up into the cloud, like with Microsoft O365 or Google, the individuals become their own governor and they get to share that data outside the organization or organizationally wide. Two separate risks, but the risk is still the same when you're looking at sensitive data, right?
Completely agree, and you actually see that we actually have a couple data points that talk about that, and we see the sensitive data sharing as a result. Comparing those two is about a difference of like 20 or 30%, kind of comparing those two environments.
Absolutely. And then when you look at poor hygiene and the state of where organizations' data is, which is all that duplicate, stale, the excessive permissions, and then that growth, that velocity of how much data is being added to it every day is not just a cost metric, but it's also a risk metric. Then you layer on Gen AI and the explosive growth of that with the data that you already had sitting there at risk. Now it's starting to be put into tools like Gen AI. A lot of new security risks there, a lot of privacy concerns around training data, storage of data, and also what kind of data is being used in those Gen AI systems. So, Kevin, you want to jump in and give us some numbers here?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that overview. So thank you, Lane. And just going in, we're going to jump right into the details and really thinking about data access governance to start with. And we're going to be going through different ways of which content is shared. And a lot of those are overlapping and similar when you're thinking about, comparing SharePoint to Google Drive. But then there's also ones that are a little bit different when you're thinking about those on-prem file servers or file shares as well. And so the first one we really want to talk about and we do get pretty refined on these exposure points, is the amount of data that is actually shared with external domains. And so what we mean by that is we're talking about business partners, you're talking about other vendors and everything else, but domains that are not personal domains. So not Gmail, not Yahoo. We have another slide on that. We'll wrap up on that one too with personal sharing. But what we see is across our customer base is on average, we are seeing over 3 million files shared with those external domains. Now, some of those are going to be for legitimate business purposes, but a lot of those are set inadvertently. And Lane, just like you were talking about earlier, because you need to be able to collaborate externally, and it's a great way to collaborate, but being aware of like, okay, what is that sensitive data, the types of that sensitive data that's being shared, so you can actually lock that down. And then if you do have an end user inadvertently doing that, you have the controls in place to detect that and remediate that is really critically important. And then is the other part on this one is we actually look at this by industry. You can see, and some of these things that when we looked at this were a little bit surprising to us, but we actually saw that financial services really had that largest percentage, with 73% of the overall data shared externally did contain sensitive information. So being able to really understand what is okay to be able to share externally and being able to make sure and lock down that content that's not okay to share externally is critically important.
Well, and I would add the stale metric in there too. I mean, how much of that data doesn't need to be shared anymore? It could have had a purpose at one point, but is there any kind of processes around reducing the risk of data that was shared 5 years ago that doesn't need to be shared anymore?
I completely agree. And if we look at the next one here is anyone links. And so just so everybody is aware, one of our best practices, this is one of the recommendations we have with most customers is that this is something that we work with you to actually disable by default because there are other effective means to be able to share content. Because anyone links is you're just creating a abstract URL that anybody can click on to actually access that content. And so what you can actually see here is that on average, across our customers, we're seeing that over 33% of data shared with anyone links does contain sensitive information. And so not only does that user that you share that anyone link to have access to it, but they can just forward that link to anybody that can also see that as well. So there's a lot of risk around anyone links, which is why, and you can do personal sharing, you can do org-wide sharing. There's all these other sharing options available to you. So this is why we do recommend disabling anyone links outright. But you can see that over 33%, and then when you slice that by industry, we actually see the highest is actually in healthcare, with 66% of content being shared does contain sensitive data, and then breaking that down by the rest is 50% in technology, retail, and financial services.
Also interesting because some of that sensitive data, especially in healthcare and the financial services, the controls required by regulation, and even some of the state privacy rules, you have to provide authentication mechanisms per user. If that link gets shared out to everyone, there's no way to understand who's accessing that data at what point, and it's sensitive data.
And then the other one here is org-wide. So, those first two scenarios we're talking about is sharing externally, but also internal sharing can also be damaging, and making sure content is locked down to those that need to know. The example I always use, which is the most, to kind of, I'm always an examples based person, is really we had one customer and we're able to find that a piece of content had been shared org wide and it had everybody's salary information in it. And so, that's the kind of information that can be very damaging to be able to do that. And it was done innocently because the file itself didn't actually have that permission. It was the folder that actually had that org-wide sharing set up there at that level. We're able to identify that for them. But you can actually see here that that convenience, just be able to share everything org-wide, can come at a cost here. where you actually do see, again, quite a bit of sensitive information being shared across the entire organization, with 57% of content being shared org-wide does contain sensitive information.
And I've seen that, experienced it, right, as a CISO, trying to apply controls in SharePoint and OneDrive where people inadvertently, or it's easy for them just to say, hey, everyone in the organization can have this. And all of a sudden PHI shows up in there, and you're sitting right here with the risk that anyone in that organization can access that. This is another one I think, that we can apply controls to limit who has access to do organizational wide sharing, and put some process in place where they must request it in certain areas and stuff to limit that risk.
And just like you said, Lane, I think a lot of these times this is just innocent mistakes by just end users, not knowing where they're putting the content, inadvertently saving information in the wrong location, and being able to have those audit and those controls to be able to detect that content as it gets put in those locations and remediate, just like you're saying, is critically important. And then continuing on, and this is we talked about this a little bit at the very introduction here. So this is about unrestricted sharing. So this is unlike the other ones where we're talking about those permissions that are more on Google Drive or SharePoint or OneDrive, where you have those sharing options. This is about internal on the file servers themselves, file shares themselves, where you really have, yeah, everyone group set up on this one. So anybody in the organization can actually see this content as well. So this is kind of the other side. Org-wide sharing is in the cloud, and then you have unrestricted sharing here on the file servers themselves. And so you see that is more, just because, Lane, like you talked about, typically file servers do have some more controls up front. But we do still see quite a bit of data with sensitive information being shared org-wide as well on the file servers. On average, we're seeing over 2 million sensitive files being shared across kind of on a per customer basis. There are about 2 million files with sensitive content being shared. And then we're seeing that on the average is about 40% of content that is actually shared here with that level, that access level, does have sensitive content as well. With in this one, I would actually, you think about the kind of the stereotypes of the industries and everything else. This one does a little bit match more the stereotypes, I think, where you think about tech being a little bit more wild, and financial services or healthcare being a little bit more conservative. We do see that kind of playing out here a little bit with technology being the highest percentage there at 46%.
It is interesting. We were talking about the stat here where healthcare was a little bit higher on the cloud side, but a little better on-prem. I think it goes to show kind of how hard controls can be in the cloud if you don't have the right visibility.
And yeah, not only the visibility, but just like you said, the ability for end users to be able to do this and have that the visibility, that monitoring, and the ability to actually kind of act relatively quickly, to be able to course correct when more often than not this stuff does happen innocently from those end users, and be able to actually detect that and catch that, and remediate on that very quickly.
Totally agree.
And then wrapping up here, so the first slide was really about sharing externally on the cloud side to more business domains. This is the one that's actually sharing to personal domains. So this is sharing sensitive email to, you think about Gmail, Yahoo, just I'm a little bit older, so Rocket Mail, any of those old kind of all those personal email addresses that you actually have.
Rocket Mail.
Thank you. I know it's yeah. Do a little Portman call out there on that one. The so now I lost track of my talk track. The no, so on the personal accounts there, but I do appreciate that you knew that one too, Lane. We're able to go and catch those personal email accounts, understand those, and be able to look at, okay, is that sensitive information? And so this is again something that we should be really looking closely at. Like, what is that business purpose for why you're actually sharing to personal email addresses versus work email addresses, and look at those with increased scrutiny as well. On average, we're seeing over 400,000 files shared on a per customer basis with sensitive data to those personal email addresses. And you look here is retail is one that really pops out here. So that one, to me, with retail, thinking about the customer base, typically in the retail industry and everything else, makes a little bit more sense as far as why that would be higher. But again, we want to be really understanding the nuance, the use cases. Why are people sharing that sensitive information? And is it appropriate? And how are they actually sharing that and managing that? Because Again, critically important that that's really well understood because there's a lot of risk around, especially those personal email accounts. And a lot of times, data exfiltration with employees leaving will show up under this one as well. And so, being able to understand that use case is critically important as well.
Yeah, that insider threat is huge. Makes me wonder how many of these have controls or allow email forwarding rules that go to personal domains.
Yeah, and that one I don't know the answer to on on that one, but yeah, I think that's a really good question. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Lane.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the different risks with some of the data that we've pulled. Uh, it's a great reminder to to understand how do we secure that sensitive data. The first thing is we have to know where it is. We have to know what it is. We have to know what's being done with it, and by who. We were talking about those anyone links, and that's a huge risk because it's hard to know who is doing what with that data. You may know what it is if it's still stored within your environment, but you have no idea who's accessing it, who's copying it, and then where does it go from there. So Concentric AI, the semantic intelligence platform, it really has a robust zero trust approach to data access governance. When you look at the platform, the monitoring and the protecting is massive. When we look at the different types of monitoring, it's not good enough to just monitor some of these things, right? So excessive permissions, some of those things we talked about with the external users, the sharing, even data that's in risky locations, locations where data contextually shouldn't be. If we have data that's in a legal context and it should be stored in O365 and all of a sudden it shows up in the Box account, we are able to detect that and alert on that, which is huge. Unclassified or misclassified data or anomalous behavior like privilege escalation, accessing sensitive data. Not only is monitoring important, but from a concentric platform side, we actually are able to automate remediation, which is huge. It's not good enough anymore to just be able to identify issues. We have to be able to take action at speed that's more than just, hey, I have this alert, some person needs to go do it. So that automation is huge. And we do this based on context using AI, not regex, not pattern matching. It'd be very difficult to do some of this with pattern matching. And to be able to do those processes in the platform and with your team, right? Kevin, him and his team do a fabulous job in helping customers create a lot of this automation in protecting their data. So we talked a lot about the data security risk side. Let's talk about GenAI for a second. It's one of the bigger risks that you hear about. I mean, is this something that we hear from customers, non-customers, potential customers, right?
So one, it's amazing how often it's been, and it's been very interesting seeing the journey around Gen AI. A year ago, like you hear about it in the market world and everything else, and it's like, yeah, and it's everybody's already on it, everyone's deployed and everything else. And then I'm talking to customers, and it's like, yeah, we're starting the journey, and it was not true, but we're starting the journey, we're learning and everything else. At this point, I think, a year later, we're in a very different environment where, a lot of our customers are in the pilot phases, if not deploying, their own Gen AI solution internally. But then also the thing that's really cropped up is end users are, all these, there's so many AI solutions now that are free that just end users can just use to ask questions and everything else. And so it reminds me of the Wild West when cell phones first came out and or smartphones, not cell phones, but smartphones first came out. And actually, how do you contemplate, your data being used on personal devices for the first time, and how do you actually really go through that process and manage that as well? And so I know you're going to talk a little bit more about this, but it is
Yeah.
really, I would say, over the last year, it's the need to be able to solve for this problem and really understand AI has really changed over the past year.
Yeah, it does remind me of the BYOD thing, which is still a very hard challenge to overcome. but the increased usage of AI it can expose a lot of the shadow Gen AI use of tools anywhere on the internet, and the security teams struggling to try to balance the enabling the business versus putting guardrails or restricting the business. I believe that we have to allow innovation to happen so that companies can grow. But if you look at the risk of allowing some of this stuff without the guardrails, like here with the Copilot, 3 million data records per customer accessed by Copilot, meaning it's ingesting that data. AI is only as good as the data continually gets fed into it. It's if you put 10 records in there, 10 documents in there, it's not as good as if you put 100,000 or a million, right? So the more data, the better it is. Well, the more data, the riskier it is, because the chance that it's sensitive or that it shouldn't have that access to it is huge. And on average, 3,000 user interactions with Copilot. So the use of that is going up quite tremendously. How do we look at this? How do we solve this? When you look at how we contextually look at documents and we categorize them, um, unprecedented capabilities, we are able to enable organizations to put guardrails and enable the business to use Gen AI where it's required, where it's needed, where it's wanted, with the right governance controls in there. If you look at the risks of just allowing it, the risks are huge with sensitive data. With Concentric AI, we can create visibility where you can see what's happening. You can apply controls to say nobody can use any of the Gen AI tools. And more specifically, you can enable certain departments based on certain data criteria, like legal department can use this one Gen AI system with legal's data or with HR's data. HR can use HR's data in this one system. You can really start to get real powerful with the Gen AI tools, with the proper governance model, which Concentric AI can really enable businesses to do.
And Lane, one thing I do want to highlight as part of this too is, we're going through a lot of the risks and we're talking about the remediation and how do you fix this and everything else. But almost always the first question I hear on the DSPM side is I don't know where my sensitive data is, and I need to understand kind of where my exposure points are to start with. And that same principle applies on on AI. And I'm hearing that a lot as well. Is like I don't really know what AI solutions my end users are using, and just being able to understand that is going to really help me to form my strategy. And that's something that's a huge area. That's the first use case we actually have on the Gen AI as well. Is out of the box, you're able to understand like, okay, what AI solutions are being used by what users.
Yep. And then put some guardrails in there. If they
Yeah.
want to allow it, they can, or block it if they feel like it's too risky. But it's not just the users using AI, Gen AI, but also that proprietary AI. When you look at IT teams starting to develop some of the processes using AI tools internally, we can help set some guardrails and protect that data that's being fed into those things. All right, so we talked a lot about enabling the business. We talked a lot about the semantic intelligence. Really comes down to context. Context becomes everything. It becomes an enabler. The difference between a purchase agreement or a contract or a cloud services agreement, a corporate agreement, that really depends on the controls that should be applied to those. It's important for us to use classification in order to allow downstream processes to work with DLP. But I believe that context-aware DLP and context-aware enablement is really where you can create a very powerful tool for businesses. To be able to say legal can do this with their own data is huge. And without that context, you can't do that, right? So we bring the overlook into focus. We can look at context, we can look at data, we can bring that in, we can identify those with pinpoint accuracy. And then start to identify stale and duplicate data. I remember when I first deployed Concentric AI at my last organization, healthcare. It was one of those eye-opening things where it's like, well, wait a minute, why is this specific like purchase agreements shared externally? Let's just remove those. That flow really changed how we secured our data.
And I would add on that lane is that is looking at the space overall, it's like this feature set right here is the detail that allows you to really map because it's like the number of customers is like yeah, we have our data retention plan, we haven't been able to implement it. Right. We want to do classification. We haven't been able to get to the nuance level to actually implement it. This is really kind of the missing component here that allows you to actually enable and deploy those use cases in detail with quality as well.
Yeah, and that automation, right?
Hmm.
Enabling that the tool to take duplicate data or near duplicate data and move it into storage areas where you can get rid of it. Stale data, applying retention policies. We shouldn't have agreements that are 30 years old per se, and maybe we need to, but we can put some controls around who has access to them with automated remediation.
I completely agree. And so, really quick, doing a time check here. We have just 1 minute left, so we'll go a couple minutes over here, but I will pick up the pace a little bit. Um, so, on the next one, we do want to talk about is speaking of duplicate and data rot, so stale data and duplicate data. What we are seeing here is that duplicate data is a very common problem across our customers. On average, our customers have around 10 million duplicate records. And we're seeing that really, we're slicing that by industry. The biggest areas we're seeing is around government, education, and retail, but definitely a problem across the board that we love working with customers to help resolve.
That's a huge problem.
It definitely is. And then the next one here on stale data is Uh, and this is my favorite one, actually, transparently. And one of the reasons why is we've had multiple customers join us after they went through a data breach, and one of the common themes I've heard from them is they've said, look, going back in time, I wish I had implemented my data retention policy because it doubled or tripled my exposure, because we hadn't done that. And so we do see kind of across the board average number of stale data records 7 million, which is just a huge opportunity to make sure that we're actually cleaning. You do get some cost benefits from just reducing the size of your data footprint as well, but from minimizing that data risk footprint, that is actually one of the top things that we recommend starting with. And you actually talked about that with some of the data access governance is actually really slicing the sharing settings with kind of that time-based aspect as well to make sure that's actually managed as part of that. And then finally is orphaned content. So again, critically component here. We slice it into orphan versus inactive, but we're seeing about 6 million pieces of orphan content, on a per customer basis here. And again, this is a critical dependency as far as when you're rolling out any one of these remediation use cases or remediation plans. One of the common steps that you want to be doing is actually notifying the data owners. So being able to actually really understand who owns that content is a critical dependency across all of these use cases. And so making sure that we're understanding who is supposed to own that and make sure we've mapped that properly is very important. So understanding why data is becoming orphaned, whether that's through employees leaving the company and not reassigning that content or deleting that content, or is from a previous data migration or some other reason, we want to make sure that we're partnering with you to make sure and get that ownership in those files with clear ownership and assigned to them. And then back to you, Lane.
Yep. So just to cover once again, we talk about data hygiene and contextually understanding the data. Concentric AI has a unique ability to categorize data, understand it contextually, look at duplicates and near duplicates, because we're looking at inside a document. We're not looking at a document's hash, for example. We're actually looking at the content and what's different in there. So we can look at duplicates or even near duplicates. Somebody changes a name in a document, and they just change the name over and over again, that becomes a near duplicate. And those rules could change with the cleanup. That differentiator reduces risk and creates a lot of efficiencies with team. The visibility around data age, and once you start to do that, you can really start to enable retention policies, deleting the data, making sure that it doesn't get copied, or reducing the number of people that have access to sensitive records. You can really start to enable the controls to reduce risk. And I
It's
think that is it for today. That's what Kevin and I have for you today. So thanks for joining us. If you want to see all the stats in the report, you can visit our website, download the report. You can scan the QR code here, reach out to us. We're happy to discuss the report and Concentric AI. Anything to add, Kevin?
Yeah, and if you have any individual questions, definitely hop on our website. We have a Q&A section there. If you're actively talking to a sales rep, make sure any follow-up questions there as well. And then if you're an active customer, make sure any questions around this, make sure you ask your CSM or Lane or myself directly. We're always available as well.
And remember, when you're looking at securing your data on-prem, in the cloud, in motion, at rest, Concentric AI can help. And even those Gen AI applications that you have that you need to really start securing in your organizations, whether it's building in-house stuff or your users using Gen AI, we can help out. Thanks
Okay.
everyone for joining.
Yes, thank you, everybody.